everybody. My name is Andrea Pereira, and I am the Assistant Director of Postdoctoral Life Design, and I'm also part of the Empower Your Peach 2025 team with Bridget Purcell and Marta Schliwa. We're super happy to have you today. Thank you for coming. If you're participating this year in Empower Your Pitch 2025, just go back through your emails, check if you've missed any communications from us, and there should be some next steps that you need to take. So just check that if you can after you leave here. And now it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Andy Ross. He's a senior lecturer and associate director of the Professional Communication Program at Hopkins. He has over a decade of experience teaching interdisciplinary writing and communication at universities nationwide. And he brings a lot of experience in science communication, technical writing, and environmental sustainability. He teaches graduate and undergraduate courses here at Hopkins in science communication and technical writing. And this is my favorite line of the intro. He's dedicated to helping scholars like you develop strong, analytical, persuasive, and collaborative communication skills. Thank you, and let's give him a welcome.
Thank you very much. I'm delighted to be here. Thank you all for joining. And I'm a big fan of Empower Your Pitch. I think this is a great event. And I'm glad we have the chance today to talk a little bit about what it will mean to communicate your research in a clear and persuasive way. Now, I think Empower Your Pitch is really fun, but I'm not going to be so naive to say that everyone loves public speaking. I think there are probably lots of reasons we can think of as to why some people don't find this exciting. In fact, they find it the opposite of exciting. Why is it that giving a presentation is so unnerving? Well, there's probably a number of reasons that we can think of. One is that as soon as I stood up from my seat there, I stepped out of anonymity and suddenly I was outnumbered up here. There's only one of me and many of you. And I think naturally we have sort of this worry in the back of our heads that somehow we're going to do something embarrassing or awkward, or someone's hand is going to go up in the back, right, with a question that we don't know the answer to. It can be challenging to be the person with all the eyes in the room on us. But today we're going to talk a little bit about some ways that we can shift our mindset about public speaking to make it not only more effective and compelling, but also more enjoyable. And I think it all starts with a story. Okay, I'll tell you a story about a friend of mine. Let's call him Andy. Okay, let's say Andy has a presentation to give, and to be honest, he's not so excited about it. And so what he does is he avoids preparing, cleans the whole house, goes for a 2-hour run. I had a friend in grad school. I don't know if this will resonate with anybody, but he told me once, he said, I'm almost ready to write my dissertation. I just need to build the desk that I will write it on by hand. And then at that point, I'll be ready to sit down and actually do some writing. Okay, so Andy avoids preparing. What happens as a result? Well, when the day arrives to actually give the presentation, he struggles, he feels nervous, it doesn't go so well. And unfortunately for Andy, that means it kind of reifies those bad feelings and little nagging self-doubts that are there. Oh, you'll never get this right. You always mess up. Can't believe you again procrastinated. And you're starting to see some of this negative feedback loop building, right? That will erode Andy's confidence. And as a result, when the next presentation arrives, he's going to be even more reticent to jump in and see this as an exciting opportunity. What's the solution? What's the way to kick Andy out of this bad habit? Yeah, in the back.
Find a way to prepare in advance and rehearse.
I think that's exactly right. I think the key to this negative feedback loop is preparation, but not just any preparation, effective preparation. really smart rehearsal and practice. So today I'm going to give you, in the next 50 minutes, some ideas for how you can prepare for your opportunity in the spotlight and prepare to feel really confident and capable when that moment arrives. I love to cook, which is why you're going to see a lot of cooking imagery in my slides. And I will do my best to explain why they're there. If you ever have questions, please raise your hand and ask. Okay, I want to start you with a recipe. A number of years ago, we cleaned out my dad's house and found a box of old recipe cards on top of the refrigerator. I don't know if anybody else in the room has one of these dusty old boxes sitting on top somewhere in the kitchen. And it made me realize that every meal sort of tells a story. It tells a story about a sequence of ingredients or a sequence of actions. It also tells a story maybe about culture and family and taste, okay? So here's my recipe for a flavorful, effective presentation. It starts with 2 tablespoons of a strong, appetizing first impression. Okay, one that we've pulled out the cliches. We're trying to be really surprising and creative in the first impression, okay? Next ingredient is a 1/2 cup of a problem worth solving. Every good presentation offers some kind of response to a research challenge or problem. Each of you are working on disciplinary concerns that hopefully your 3-minute pitch will somehow work to address. Next is a cup of clear and novel findings or contributions. Notice that this is the 3rd ingredient and not the last ingredient. Sometimes people feel like they have to build their way up to their most important point. In a 3-minute pitch, you don't have that liberty. So you need to front load what's most innovative or important in terms of your research. Next is a 1/4 cup of meta-commentary. Meta-commentary is a fancy word for language about language. If I use a phrase like, in other words, or for example, or in conclusion, these are all signal phrases that people's ears are sort of tuned to pick up on as being somehow helpful, significant, important, or otherwise worth paying attention to. Next is a handful of examples, or maybe an analogy, some kind of comparison that's going to help your audience who may not be experts in your field to understand what it is you have to say. A narrative element, a little story, has a unique ability to stick in our minds in ways that technical information might not. Next is 12 ounces of appropriate, well-designed visual aids. Today, we're going to talk a bit about slides. There's a lot that could be said, but I'll give you a couple of ideas for how to make your visuals align well with your spoken narrative. And then lastly, we end the recipe with a tablespoon of a confident ending. It's like that squeeze of lemon or a dash of hot sauce that kind of just picks everything up right at the very end. Okay, let's go through each of these briefly. And I'm happy to make this interactive. So if you have a comment or a question, please share.
So just curious, why did you put strong, appetizing first impression first and problem solving in the second? Is this with this assumption that you already have a question in mind and you were focusing more on like how to present it?
Yes.
Oh,
Yeah, my assumption is that you've thought through your research, you've done 3 years of work, and now you have 3 minutes to present it. Okay? Okay, so there's this Latin phrase that you see inscribed on old buildings and columns and stuff. It says, Finis ab origine pendit, and it means basically the end depends upon the beginning. What in the world does this have to do with public speaking? Well, I think our audience makes very quick and sometimes even subconscious judgments about a presentation, even before the presenter has opened their mouth. So it's our responsibility to do our best to try to create a strong first impression. The first impression here, just to be clear, is not like the first word we say. It's maybe even the first visual cue that we present. If I were to come in here and had a bunch of papers that I was shuffling around, or if I was, sort of staring at my feet, rocking like this, you might think, oh, Andy's feeling kind of nervous. Sometimes people, when they're trying to get the words exactly right, they'll be practicing beforehand, with their eyes closed, and they'll be mouthing the words. And I'm not sure that always gives the best, strongest, most helpful first impression. It may be better to plan so that as soon as you arrive, you're not going over notes, you've internalized everything, and you're already on stage as soon as you walk in the door or press that login button on Zoom. We want to hook our audience's attention in a creative way. Attention, I think, really is the rarest commodity in public speaking. So the hook is in this moment that's really important where we can reach out and sort of say, here's why you should pay attention. Here's what's going to be unique and creative and compelling about what I have to say. What are some ways that you've seen people do this? When you're in the audience for a talk, a research presentation, what does the hook sometimes look like or sound like?
In a stand-up, it could be like a fill in the blank sort of thing.
Okay. You're giving some kind of some kind of sentence to complete or a challenge to consider. Am I understanding correctly? You've asked the audience to do something. I like that idea. What else?
Make a connection between very
eye contact, if they
disparate.
notice that somebody is nodding their head towards what they're saying or in agreement, so they tend to, focus their attention sometimes to one group more than the other, or they first sort of scan the room to see where they can direct which voice, if they know their audience in advance.
Sure, or even not. I think it's helpful to be able to make eye contact and scan the room, maybe say hello to somebody that you know. Hi, Holly.
Hi, Andy.
I often like to start presentations with a story. Something that asks people to consider or imagine a scenario. Something that makes them feel some degree of emotional investment in the topic. Here's an example, and I hope the sound will cooperate. Anya Jastreboff studies obesity at Yale. And in 2025, in February of 2025, if I use a word like Ozempic, people sort of might nod and recognize what that is. In 2023, she gave a presentation about diabetes and obesity at a point when the research was a little bit less well known. This is a talk she gave for medical professionals, and I just want you to pay attention to the hook. What's the move that Dr. Jastreboff makes to kind of grab the attention and interest of the audience?
Good afternoon. And
They're all related to together. There's plenty of work to be done. Okay, so let's get started. If the clicker works. The clicker does not work. Obesity medicine. So let me ask you a question. What if there was one thing that you could do to transform your patients' lives? One thing. And what if I told you that that one thing was treating your patient's obesity and treating it in such a way that not only did they lose weight, but they maintained that weight reduction. So for the next 40 minutes, I'd like to invite you to set aside any preconceived notions you may have about obesity, what it is, what causes it, and even how to treat it. And open your minds and be curious to treating obesity as you would treat any other chronic treatable disease.
What stood out to you? I know you couldn't see her very well. She's got slides shared, but what's the move? Yeah,
I feel like she made it personal for the audience to find them to have a person in their lives they connect with the presentation she's about to give.
great. Okay. An invitation, a request to think of this as a personal issue. Yeah, what else?
The first graphic.
What if, right? It doesn't start with her title and her name and stuff like that. It's got a slide that we use visually to sort of cue some reflection in the audience. Yeah, I like that move. I also like the move where she says, I'd ask you to set aside for the next hour your perspective and maybe be open-minded about this topic. Now, in a short pitch, you might not need to make that request, but in a longer presentation like this, I think it's helpful to call on the audience to be open-minded. Okay. The next step in our recipe is to have a clear sense of your purpose in this presentation. What are you trying to do? And I will argue that each of you are trying to address a problem. Before you can do that in a convincing way, you need to define the problem. So some questions you can ask yourself, again, in advance. You're not asking these during the presentation. This is for your preparation, is where does your problem originate? What's the source or the background? What key terms define the problem? Are you going to use specific jargon that you need to find a way to define? Who is impacted by the issue? Can you put a human face on the topic? What are the stakes of the problem? How should we measure this issue? Or maybe another way of asking this is, why is this a problem worth solving? That's a question that I think is sometimes overlooked. We assume that if people showed up for our presentation, they'll see our work as interesting. But I think it's a missed opportunity to go one step forward and say, this matters because. Okay? This matters because it's an opportunity, or it provides an avenue for, or a unique moment that we can somehow benefit from. I hope these questions are helpful to you as you think about how to narrowly frame and define the challenge that's at the heart of your research. Okay. Another way of thinking about the problem you want to address is thinking about who's in the room, who's at the table. Is your audience someone who you don't want to offend or frustrate somehow? You want to appeal to some priority or interest that they have? Does your audience have a particular goal in mind? Are they here to understand something? Like what brought them to the table? Lastly, what problems are they most interested in? If there's a way for you to frame your work as being not only beneficial to you, but also beneficial to the people who are listening to you, I think you're more likely to get a positive response. Okay, let's look at an example of someone defining a technical problem through multiple means. This is a TED Talk that was given about a particular type of surgery. It's given by a biomedical engineer named Nikolai Begg. We won't watch the full talk, though I do recommend it to you. We'll just watch the first couple of minutes, and I want you to pay attention to how does he define the problem that his research addresses.
The first time I stood in the operating room and watched a real surgery, I had no idea what to expect. I was a college student in engineering. I thought it was going to be like on TV. Ominous music playing in the background, beads of sweat pouring down the surgeon's face. But it wasn't like that at all. There was music playing on this day. I think it was Madonna's Greatest Hits. And there was plenty of conversation, not just about the patient's heart rate, but about sports and weekend plans. And since then, the more surgeries I watch, the more I realize this is how it is. In some weird way, it's just another day at the office. But every so often, the music gets turned down, everyone stops talking, and stares at exactly the same thing. And that's when you know that something absolutely critical and dangerous is happening. The first time I saw that, I was watching a type of surgery called laparoscopic surgery. And for those of you who are unfamiliar, laparoscopic surgery, instead of the large open incision you might be used to with surgery, a laparoscopic surgery is where the surgeon creates these 3 or more small incisions in the patient, and then inserts these long, thin instruments and a camera, and actually does the procedure inside the patient. Now this is great because there's much less risk of infection, much less pain, shorter recovery time, but there is a trade-off. Because these incisions are created with a long, pointed device called a trocar. And the way the surgeon uses this device is that he takes it and he presses it into the abdomen until it punctures through. And now the reason why everyone in the operating room was staring at that device on that day was because he had to be absolutely careful not to plunge it through and puncture it into the organs and blood vessels below. But this problem should seem pretty familiar to all of you because I'm pretty sure you've seen it somewhere else. Remember this? You knew that at any second that straw was going to plunge through, and you didn't know if it was going to go out the other side and straight into your hand or if you were going to get juice everywhere, but you were terrified, right? Every single time you did this, you experienced the same fundamental physics that I was watching in the operating room that day. And it turns out it really is a problem. In 2003, the FDA actually came out and said that trocar incisions might be the most dangerous step in minimally invasive surgery. Again, in 2009, we see a paper that says that trocars account for over half of all major complications in laparoscopic surgery. And oh, by the way, this hasn't changed for 25 years.
I think there's probably 3 ways that he defines the problem that his work addresses. What did you pick up on? What's the first way?
Storytelling.
Storytelling. Yeah, right? The narrative of being in the operating room.
And he made a joke.
Okay, the second means is sort of this humorous metaphor, comparing it to the juice pouch. That lightens the mood, but it's also for folks like me who've never been in a surgical room, it's kind of helpful to see a comparison.
And it speaks to everyone as well.
That's much more universal. Yeah, absolutely. It's much easier to relate to. The third,
Scientific examples.
right here, yeah, quoting the literature, right? It's not just me who thinks this is a problem. Look, there's these other people standing behind. All right. In a 3-minute talk, you don't have all the same opportunities as a longer TED talk. So you need to provide the right amount of structure. Just like a good recipe has the right amount of detail in the instructions, your presentation needs to be selective about what kinds of details you want to share. You know, this is a typical scientific structure. This is one that we're very familiar with. But in a short pitch, you might not be the right situation to employ this old friend. Here's another option for you. It's an acronym of CORE. And again, this is things you would want to work on as you prepare. So the acronym stands for an accurate view of context. What's the background here? A full sense of the opportunity. Here's where I'm coming from and here's what I'm trying to do. Here's how I do it. This is my response to the problem, okay? And then the last element is an articulation of the effect. Here is a problem. This is why it's worth solving. This is how I'm going to solve it. And the benefit is, it's sort of a maybe streamlined or distilled version of the classic scientific journal paper. I think for a short pitch, it provides a nice little framework to work with. Here's an example, actually, of a 3-minute pitch from Australia that uses the core principles. So watch and listen for the content, but maybe more importantly is to pick up on the structure. Listen for context, opportunity, response,
Quick
and
question.
effect.
Sorry, could you repeat the questions you asked? You said the accurate view, it starts with the problem and then how, what, I didn't catch that.
Oh, where does this come from? Like, what is this problem? Where does it come from? Why is it worth solving? How are we solving it or addressing it? Maybe we're not solving it, but making a response. And then what's the effect? I think the next presenter answers all of those questions. She opens with a joke that I don't understand because it's an Australian reference. So if anybody can explain it, just let me know.
Mosquito-borne disease is Ross
Sciences. Her presentation title is Mosquito Research, Saving Lives with Pantyhose and Paperclips.
I came to Australia to study the deadliest animal in the world. Now, there may be some Australian audience members thinking, Struth, science has finally recognized the importance of the drop bears. But I'm not studying drop bears, because around the world, by transmitting diseases like malaria and dengue fever, mosquitoes kill more than 1 million people every year, making them the deadliest animal on the planet. Now, in Australia, the most common mosquito-borne disease is Ross River virus, and it occurs at high rates in some areas, but not others. My question is why? What is it about certain areas that makes them breed disease? If we can understand the environmental factors that contribute to disease transmission, then we can alter the environment or target our control efforts to prevent human infections. But to answer that question, I had to find out where the infected mosquitoes were in South Australia. And traditionally, testing mosquitoes for virus has always been difficult. So I used a new technique. It takes these cards, which are embedded with virus-preserving chemicals, and coats them in honey. Mosquitoes will come to feed on the honey, and in the process, spit virus onto the card where it can later be detected. Now, no one had ever used this technique in a broad-scale virus survey before, so I had to adapt it. I developed new traps and set them at over 100 field sites across South Australia. Then I captured over 20,000 hungry mosquitoes and let them feed on the card for a week before testing the cards for virus. Now, you may not think that these traps look very impressive, but science doesn't have to be beautiful. It has to be effective, and these traps are proving to be our most sensitive method of detecting infected mosquitoes. I found 3 types of infection: Ross River virus, Barmah forest virus, and Stratford virus, which has never before been found in South Australia. I now have the virus data I need to conduct my analysis, and I'm collecting publicly available data about the environment surrounding my traps, like the density of human housing, the biodiversity of mammals, and the ratio of green space to buildings, to see if any of those environmental factors can link these virus hotspots that I've shown here. But the most exciting part of my research so far has been the success of this method. Public health officials in Victoria, Queensland, and Western Australia have been in contact with us about implementing this technique for their surveillance next year. And I developed these traps on a tight budget. I used recycled milk cartons, pantyhose, and paper clips to make the traps. Each trap costs less than $1 and can be reused for the whole season. That was important to me because the majority of mosquito-borne disease risk happens in economically impoverished countries. In India, for example, where about a quarter of the population lives on $1 a day, there are 33 million cases of dengue infection every year. With my low-budget virus surveillance and spatial analysis method, I can help any country, regardless of resources, find out where their deadliest animals occur, why they're there, and how we can stop them from infecting humans. Thanks.
3 minutes goes. 3 minutes goes quickly, but I think it's a nicely structured version that packs in a lot of information without going overboard. Let me put up this little acronym again. And since we have time, folks on Zoom and folks here in the room, why don't you spend like a minute in your notes, writing out just super quickly, sketching out for your project, how would you use the core principles? What's the context? What opportunity are you addressing? How are you doing so? What's the effect? And then after maybe a minute of just kind of brainstorming, I'm gonna have you talk with your neighbor. Okay, I know there wasn't a ton of time, but now I'd like you to chat with your neighbor or neighbors. You could give a 1 minute pitch, or you could just talk through your notes. 2.5 minutes can be really valuable practice to hear yourself try to talk through these things quickly. And do it while somebody else is listening and nodding along or having kind of a blank look on their face. That can be very helpful experience and feedback. So I want to give you a couple of warnings using the CORE elements. In a 3-minute talk, we don't need a ton of context. Don't spend 2 minutes of your time just giving the background. Try to be sparingly with the amount of details you provide. Try to condense what we need to know in order to more quickly get at what you want us to know. And think about results. It's that R element, the response, the action that you're doing and the effect of that action that people are probably going to be most invested in. So I would recommend eliminating as much as possible details that are interesting but unnecessary. You have lots of other opportunities to include all the details that you find fascinating, but here you want to be selective for the benefit of your audience. In my classes, we use an acronym called WIFI. WIFI stands for What's in it for you, and you here is the audience. Every good pitch has a WIFI where you'll say, here's what I'm going to give you. It's almost like a offer, a wager even, maybe to say, in the next 3 minutes, what I want to do is change the way that you think about whatever. Or for the next 2.5 minutes, I'm going to give you 2.5 ways that we can address blah, 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 right? But offering that upfront is almost like an incentive for the audience to listen and care. We're almost sort of wagering a little bit, saying, see if I can hold up my end of the bargain. But without that strong WIFI at the start, I think folks don't know what they're listening for or what they should care about. We want to be explicit and clear upfront. We also want to think about the verbs, the actions behind our project. What are we trying to do? Are we challenging something? Are we uncovering something? Are we theorizing, simplifying, clarifying? What's the verb that would best describe our project in one word? Or if we needed to make it a noun, is it an application, a tool? Are we coming here with a new approach that we're offering to the field? I think it's important to think about constructively and clearly how you describe your own project. And to try to do it as like narrowly and impactfully as possible. So lots of people like to theorize or present some kind of novel approach, but your audience may not know what a novel approach is. They may not be able to picture that. So the more you can make it concrete, I think the better. And every meal is like a story. I've already made that claim. It has a good, arc. It has a beginning, middle, and end. And so I want to encourage you to think of your presentation as a narrative, less as a series of points. We always talk about points. I need to make 5 points, but I'm kind of against points unless they're plot points, right? Unless we're thinking in terms of the story that we want to tell and the journey that we want to take our audience on. What kind of narrative do you want to tell? Do you want it to have an arc that involves lots of rising action and ends on a high note and is very exciting? Or do you feel like there needs to be a dip at some point in the emotional tenor of the story? Thinking about the shape, the structure of the story in advance is very helpful. And there are some components that all good stories have. You know them, are obvious, but all good stories have characters. There will be characters in your pitch. The protagonist may be you, or the protagonist may be mosquitoes, or maybe a trocar, or the main character may be an oboe, or a bassoon, or any kind of object that you want people to care about. Characters need to be well-rounded, interesting, and worth investing our attention. There also needs to be a conflict that drives a story. When I was a kid, I hated going to bed. So my dad would say, all right, you get in bed, and I'm gonna tell you a very boring story. He was really good at this because the story that he would tell had no conflict. Nothing would go wrong. No one would face any challenges. It was just sunshine and daisies. And pretty soon I was asleep, okay? So you gotta have some kind of problem that's worth caring about. And then a sequence of events that address that problem. That's the plot. The plot can happen in the lab, the plot can happen in the field, the plot can happen in historical archives, the plot can happen lots and lots of different places. But I think our audience will care, what are you doing? What are you doing? And then to what end? What's the resolution? Your research maybe doesn't end or solve a conversation, but it reaches a point where the conversation can take the next step forward. And I think it's helpful for you to signal that. The 3-minute pitch about mosquitoes did a nice job of saying, here's why I continue to be excited about this project. Here's where I think this can go from here. Okay, a couple quick resources to recommend to you before we talk about slides. Wired Magazine has a great series of videos called 5 Levels, where an expert in this case on the left is a computer scientist who researches machine learning. Their task is to explain their research at 5 different levels of difficulty. So they usually start with explaining their work to a child and then move up to somebody in high school, in college, a postdoc, and then another, academic researcher. They're really fun to watch to see how somebody who knows their subject so well can still be clear and accessible and describe their work at an appropriate level of difficulty. The other online resource that I recommend is actually a series of videos from Bon Appetit magazine. On the right is a chef named Carlo Lally Music. On the left is DeAndre Jordan, who plays center for the Denver Nuggets and is not a chef. He's a professional basketball player. The challenge here is that Chef Carla is teaching DeAndre to make the same dish, but he can't watch her. He can only listen to her. So she has to explain to him in terms that he'll understand what to do and how to do it. So this requires a lot of repetition, a lot of analogy, a lot of specificity, the appropriate level of pace and clarity. Anyways, they're really fun to watch and see how the recipe turns out. If I remember correctly, he did a really nice job. Okay, let's talk a little bit about slides. My favorite animal will not surprise you. I'm a big fan of giraffes. In fact, fun fact, I am the exact size of a newborn giraffe. Here we have a beautiful example of this majestic creature, but not a great example of a slide. PowerPoint, I think, primes us to think this way, where we put a picture on the right side and speaking notes on the left. And if I forget something, I can just quickly glance back and use this as my notes. But it's kind of sad, right? We've put this animal in a box. I propose filling the full slide with our image and trying to really make a visual impact the best we can, and then being selective about what text we want to draw our audience's attention to. Here's another example, right? If I was to give a presentation about a malady that I may or may not have recently gotten over, I might use bullet points like this. What's the problem here, though?
Boring.
It's boring. It's boring. It's also too much for one slide, especially too much for me to remember. So what I'm going to do is turn my back to you and talk to the screen, right? But really what I want to do is highlight this beautiful illustration and then have one assertion or one takeaway that I want you to care about, right? So be balanced and a little bit elegant in the way that we use visuals. Too often I see slides like this, which are really meant as a handout. And they ask the audience to do two things at once, to read and to listen. And that's almost impossible, right? So instead, we can make slides that will help the audience. If I had like a billboard somewhere that I owned and could put any message I want on it, it would say something like, the slides are for the audience. Because I see too many people thinking that these are my speaking notes, when in fact they're not. The speaking notes you've already internalized. You've practiced and prepared so much that you have all the material right up here. And you can ignore this as much as possible. Question or comment in the back?
Do you actually have an institute named after you?
No. You caught me. You caught me. There is no such thing as the Andy Ross Institute for Patient
I was
Safety.
like, it's quite impressive.
Someday there will be. Okay, another technique that I like when it comes to slides is using very simple animations to structure your content. So if I want to talk about a process, I can illustrate it on my slide without having to have the whole story on the screen at once, right? Even if I want to do some math, I can just quickly click things on as I want to talk through them, right? So this way, I'm not going to be tempted to turn and face the screen because I haven't yet clicked on what I think is most important. I'm just pacing myself using a peer animation, not the whole like twirl around and do a backflip animation, just appear. Okay? Keep it simple, but I think this is a helpful way of pacing your own visuals. I have an example of a pro doing this in a speech, but I think for the sake of time, I'm going to skip it and instead end with just a couple minutes about figures, charts and graphs. Ooh, we love those. But how do you present them on a slide and in a short pitch? Like this. No, maybe not like this, right? This is a figure in which they've really tried to condense about a dozen graphs into one. And what I find funny is when people will give a talk, they'll put a slide like this on the screen, and then they'll say, as you can see. I can't see anything, right? I can't see anything. So when you want to visualize something, you still need to go the extra step of pointing something out for the audience, like this. Anyone see something odd or amiss here? It's a little blurry.
You went from a graph to a rose.
I went from a graph to a rose. That's a little bit surprising.
Maybe there's a message.
There is a message. In fact, there's something hidden here. Anybody see it? If I could hide that better, I would.
I think you just want to say maybe you want to make your graph look as pretty as this rose.
Oh, that would be nice. I like that. Does anybody see the dolphin?
Where?
Right here.
Oh.
Why did you see it once I circled? And that's obvious, right? I circled it. I pointed to it. I made it visually obvious. When you present a graph or a chart, I encourage you to do the same. If there's a plot point that you really want us to notice, don't assume we're going to notice it unless you put an arrow, a circle, or some other use of color that's going to make it very, very easy for us to notice. So here are my tips very quickly for how to present figures. Have a purpose in mind. Don't just show a graph because that's what you think you need to do. A graph in a written text doesn't always work in PowerPoint, okay? Remember your audience. What do you need them to see? Where might they be confused? Why might the figure or chart or table be inaccessible for the audience? Pick the right figure type. Not all chart forms are built the same. Some are better at representing one thing over another. Draft your figures, revise, iterate, get feedback, show them to people that don't know your subject, ask them to interpret it. What do they notice? What stands out to them? What is the thing that they grab hold of first visually? Before they even know what is going on, what's their pre-attentive, first step? What's the thing that they latch onto almost unconsciously? Maybe the most important, in closing, the most important thing that I can encourage you to do between now and whenever it is you're going to give your 3-minute pitch is to practice, is to hear yourself saying these words out loud. And not just out loud alone in your office, but out loud for an audience who can give you feedback. This is what I call deliberate practice, where immediately you get comments that will help you internalize what your next best step is. If you're looking for a good resource for deliberate practice, I would encourage you to sign up for a free consultation through the Hopkins Technical Communication Lab. This is a resource that my program, the Professional Communication Program, helps to run. These appointments are free and available to the Hopkins community to use. You have the chance to meet with consultants like myself who are paid to listen to your presentation and give you feedback. Completely free and available to you to use to prepare. That is the thought that I think I will leave you with best of luck for your upcoming 3-minute pitch. Thank you so much.
You want to take a few questions?
We have 3 minutes until 4. Do we want to use them?
Yes,
Okay.
that would have helped.
We have 3 minutes. I saw your hand go up first.
So you technically do this for a living, right?
I technically do this. Yes.
Like, help people how to be better with their communication. I meant to ask a very serious question. So you're really good at this. You're really good at creating these slides and, making it look so appealing. We spend most of our time on computer trying to, put numbers and figures look presentable to our PIs.
Yes.
Who really want to put the tongue to the paper. So we don't know how to do all of that, right? Like make things look good. So do you have any tips on that? Like how to really, what are some of the tools that we can use to learn the way you presented these slides?
So the question is how to improve your presentation ability while you're still doing research in the lab and juggling other priorities. I think there's a number of opportunities. One is to take a class like those that I teach here at Hopkins. But another that's actually maybe in some ways more available is to take your show on the road and go to conferences and practice and sign up for competitions and, pitch your work at any opportunity that you can reach. The best way to learn is by doing, in my opinion.
Yeah, I'm wondering, we all have very different areas that we're studying. How do you know how much context to give? Where do you stop? Am I supposed to assume everybody knows what DNA, RNA, enzymes are?
Yeah, great
Should I
question.
stay away from those words?
No, I think it's maybe a missed opportunity to shy too far away from the technical terms. The answer is pretty subjective because it really depends on the audience. And so I would keep your audience in mind and then maybe come down like 1 degree in terms of complexity. So assume willingness to follow you, assume willingness to think deeply about the concepts you're presenting, but maybe also assume lack of familiarity with all the jargon and the latest research.
Scare are very good with the science. Scaring your audience.
To scare your audience.
Especially like for myself, like this like scare them and then
In some respects, that's what Nikolai Begg did with the trocar. I felt myself sort of getting a little worried, but I think you don't want to go too far. Maybe better than scaring your audience is to show them why this matters or convince them that it's not scary, but important. So oncology, you've got loads of ways of doing that, right? Without having to be sensational in the way you might make somebody feel afraid. Okay, all right. Yeah.
When I think of like pitch, I normally think of like asking for money and haven't really done the majority of the work.
Yeah.
So I was wondering if you kind of clarify, like for me, I'm towards the end of my PhD, so most of the work is like complete and I can give something about the future, but is the pitch like, this is why my work is important, or like, this is what we should do next or something?
Right, great question. It may depend. If you're giving a pitch for funders, I really do think it's valuable to go the extra step of saying, and that's why we're asking you for X. Don't be afraid to make the ask at the end of the pitch. But in a competition like Empower Your Pitch, I don't know that it's necessary to make a request like you would in another context. Instead, it's maybe the importance at the end, the effect that you can emphasize as the ask. Yeah.
So you said that we can present some slides, but in a 3-minute pitch, you don't really have time for slides. So is it still recommended?
I think I had 20-ish slides for an hour. 3 minutes goes really fast, really fast. I believe you're allowed slides.
Yes, you're allowed, but you don't have to if you feel that's going to be too distracted. And you can go to the Empower Your Pitch website and there are videos of previous years and you can see what other people have done. Some people have brought props. Other people have just talked for 3 minutes. Others had slides with pictures or graphs. So I think it's whatever aids your message, not the other way around. You don't have to explain what you have on the screen. You have to aid it in a way. And maybe you don't need any aids. You need music.
Three slides in 3 minutes would, for me, would probably be the limit. I would not recommend going beyond that. Hey,
So what if you're doing your pitch for a job interview? How
Right.
do you help tailor that pitch to the mission of the company?
yeah, super helpful to be able to do that. I think it maybe comes back to the WIFI that I had talked about, where early on you can say, I'm excited to present this research for these reasons that are important to your company. So for you in particular, I really want to make sure we get a chance to talk about X, Y, and Z. And that shows, oh, this isn't just the same pitch that they give any opportunity. This has been sort of tailored for us. They've thought through who we are and why we're invested or interested. I'm happy to stick around and chat more about this. You've been a great audience. Thank you so much. Good luck. Have fun.